I happen to agree with Dokoupil, the anchor on this topic, but I also understand why some would think it was a surprisingly tough line of questioning for a morning show book tour. But execs at CBS, after fielding staff complaints for a week now, have now disavowed the whole interview.
I want to be clear. We will still ask tough questions. We will still hold people accountable. That's part of our job, too. But we will do so objectively. And that means, very plainly, we have to check our bias and opinions at the door. And that applies to every single one of us. After a review of our coverage, including the interview, it's clear there are times we have not met our editorial standards.
Now, I'm not sure exactly what editorial standards it failed, but yes, it was a surprising, I don't know, cable news-like moment on a network morning show. What does this have to do with DEI? You're telling me people who work in a newsroom are so triggered by that interview that they need a self-described mental health expert and trauma trainer to come in and make sure everyone's okay? Or is it just that everything somehow goes back to DEI? Joining me now, John Ziegler, conservative commentator and host of the Death of Journalism podcast. John, I'm going to ask you a sort of a layup question here, but how does a DEI consultant actually add to this particular conversation?
Well, I actually think that the DEI aspect of this may tell the real story of what's going on here, because we live in a media world now where DEI is everything, even when it shouldn't matter to the actual subject. You showed there the clip. There were 4 people on that set. 1 was a straight white male. The other 3 happened to be people of color. If Gayle King had asked the exact same questions that Tony did, we would not be having this conversation. This would not be a controversy because Gayle King is a black female who also happens to be friends with Oprah. She has all sorts of PC protection. No one's going to go after her on DEI grounds. And so I think Tony's race is an important element of this. But as far as the death of journalism is concerned, I'm not sure if this story is a comedy, a tragedy, or a parody, because CBS's response to this is ludicrous on so many levels. Can you imagine on the first anniversary of 9/11 if something like this had occurred where there was an author who was pro-Taliban and was gently chided on national television, and somehow the anchor person who asked them legitimate questions got basically destroyed in front of their own co-workers in a ridiculous meeting? That would be unfathomable, but that's how much journalism has degraded over the last 20 years or so.
And by the way, Coates didn't seem particularly rattled by the question. He seemed kind of almost ready for the question to some degree. And this is what he said afterwards. This is number 2 when he was asked about it.
I don't really have a problem with a tough interview. You know, I knew what I wrote. You know, I knew I'd be confronted. Was he rude? Was he aggressive? I can't really get into that. Like, it's not really something that I think too much about. The question I would ask, though, is how often on CBS, on NBC, on ABC, or any major news organization do you see someone who is a defender of the Israeli state project get confronted in that kind of way?
Now, look, I'll disagree with him about where the bias is in media on that. Okay. But the bottom line is he's not claiming that this was somehow a racial issue. He's saying it was a disagreement over what's happening in Israel.
Well, not only that, Dan, but I'd urge, and I'm sure you have, I'd urge your viewers to watch the full interview. It ends in an extremely friendly fashion. This was actually a fascinating discussion, and the fact that this episode is clearly going to have a chilling effect over future interviews is really troubling. We're already in a situation where journalism is in a death spiral, and for this to happen now in the middle of an election and the anniversary of the October 7th attacks is, I think, a really damning indictment of the industry as a whole, and I don't think the way CBS handled it is going to help at all.
And I don't think they're giving Coates enough credit to be able to handle himself. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen, and don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.